Welcome to Solution Focused Future. We're sitting here today with Elfie Czerny. I butcher your name. With Elfie Czerny and Dominik Godat. And Elfie and Dominik, how do you like to be introduced?
What a difficult question. It's maybe the most difficult to ask. For me, might I rephrase it? How would I like to invent myself today, maybe?
Sure.
I'm an interactionalist, so I'm really passionate about looking at interactions and at conversations and at what we do from an interactional perspective. I love to write, which I only a few years ago discovered, and I'm really excited about. And obviously, I'm a very passionate solution-focused practitioner.
Thank you. And Dominik?
Yeah, it's a good question. I like Elfie's answer. Because every time we talk about us, then we hear different stories that inspire us. So I would say I'm a solution-focused promoter of solution focus in books, articles, and workshops, and wherever we podcast, wherever we go. And the last 7 years has been very influential for us because we got to know Janet Bavelas and the microanalysis of face-to-face dialogue. And ever since, that has really changed our perception of solution focus and also of interactions in general. So when Elfie says she's an interactionalist, I would agree with that we're both looking at the world through the lens of interactions. And we're very good in selling solution focus as everyday good conversations. That's probably.
And for the people who don't know, you're married and you have a practice together. So could you explain a little bit more about that and maybe the adventure that you went on over the past 18 months?
Yeah, thank you for adding that, because I think that's a very important part I would like to add to my professional side of being. So we have a daughter who is 8 now, and Dominik and I are actually not married.
You're not? I'm sorry, you're partners, though.
No, but we are a couple,
yes,
and
you're a couple.
We are, something like, we feel we are married. So anyway, it's okay to say that. I hopefully also am a good sister to my 2 siblings and a good daughter to my parents and a good kind of daughter-in-law to Dominik's parents. And we are really glad that they are still all here with us. And that's something also very important to us. And that was also part of when we traveled the United States and Canada for 2 years, and then and plus Europe for all in all, I think almost 3 years. And that was kind of interesting because we didn't see our family that much, and yet we always felt very connected. Mm-hmm. So that for sure is a very important part of our life.
Now, I know you were avid podcasters and practitioners. But how, when you were traveling, were you able to monetize life so that you could afford to do this? Like, how did you live and travel for the better part of 3 years?
Joe, may I just say something? When people on the road came to us and asked us this question, we usually asked them a solution-focused question. We told them, maybe ask you a question first, and then you can ask us any questions you want. And we had a set of cards where they pulled a card and, just got a solution-focused question from us, like, I don't know, how might you notice in the course of this day that you're on a good way through the day? And then they had to answer 5 elements, and then we would allow them to ask us any questions.
That's a great non-answer, Elfie.
I think the story, the question you asked, the story began when we met at the Solution Focus conference, and even before, after conference, but before we got together, we were writing through Facebook, And we got to know each other through a hug. It was Marco Matera at the Soul World Sea conference who showed at the Soul Cabaret how Italians can hug. And Marco showed that to Elfie, and I wasn't there. So she came to breakfast, and I was sitting at a breakfast table, and she came, and others came, and we talked, and then they talked about this hugging thing, and I wasn't there. So I said, Elfie, well, you have to show me. So she showed me, and we hugged the first time, and there's a special way of hugging from heart to heart. And then we tumbled and had to get chocolate. There was a table with chocolate. We ate chocolate. We laughed, and then we hugged again.
Ourselves again.
And then we hugged again. And then Elfie left. She had to leave the conference. And then we started writing through Facebook. And we said, well, wouldn't it be nice if everyone, we could kind of travel the world and spread love and spread solution focus. And Elfie drew a little RV with the name of Hearty from Heart Hug. Yeah. And so this was started even before we got together. And then at the Solution Focus conference in Austria, we got together. And we still have the picture of the RV that Elfie drew. And when we got pregnant quite fast, after like half a year or so together. And so for the first 2.5 years, wasn't a topic to travel. But then after 2 years, we realized, well, if we want to do that, then we need to do it before Bibiana, our daughter, comes to kindergarten. So it would be perfect to do it now. And so we came up with the idea of SF, Solution Focus on Tour. And we bought this RV, and then when we bought it, we had those pictures on the on our refrigerator, and we found the picture that Elfie drew, and we compared it. It was almost exactly the same. So, the preferred future of our first interactions led us on this journey.
And we had money saved for our house to answer this question.
Yeah.
Well, but there's no way you burned through your nest egg while traveling for 3 years. You had to figure out how to. I mean, how did you?
We had 250,000 Swiss francs, or now euro, and we spent it all.
So you did. You literally burned through. Oh, wow.
We didn't earn money those 2.5-3 years at all. And
you're inspirational.
So we just it's I think the question of how this came together and then Elfie's kind of moment of enlightenment led the way.
Yeah, but I think so for us it was really we had this dream of having a place where we could do trainings and like a house where we delivered the solution focused trainings, invite people over, and like a solution focus center, and also physical. And we were actually starting to look for a house, and we looked in Switzerland. I'm from Austria, so we live in Switzerland. Dominik is Swiss. So we looked in Austria, then we thought, the more we thought, the more it was like, okay, we could live here or maybe somewhere in between in Germany, I don't know. And, the scope of where we looked for a house became broader and broader. And one day, Dominik was going to his parents with our daughter. I sat down and I had just this lovely day just for myself at home, which I really love and appreciate when I do have that. And I was sitting down and meditating, and all of a sudden it hit me like, okay, we should just take the money, and if we don't find the place, if it doesn't work, do something different, right? So we should just do our journey that we dreamed of when we first met each other. And Dominik came home with Bibi that day, with our daughter that day, and I looked at him and I said, I think we should just drive. And he immediately knew what I meant, and he looked at me and he said yes, and I'm like, do you know what I'm talking about? And he's like, yes, let's do it. And then we just started to think about, to really give a even more clearer picture to our preferred future. And we said, okay, we have this money, so let's use this money and let's get on the road for however long it is fun and for however long the money lasts. And even if we want to be on the road for a longer time, then things will come and we will find a way how to to earn the money. But it somehow worked out this way. And it's a very blessed position, because I think not everyone can just say we have this money and yet it's a decision, right? We don't have our house, so we are now renting an apartment and not having our own property.
Oh, but the adventure, no one can ever take away the adventure you had. That's
yeah.
And I think the cool thing was that when we traveled, then it was clear we want to do a solution focus on tour in a solution focused way, and also meeting a lot of solution focused practitioners, interviewing them, and then just spending time with them. And what was always clear was that we are also ready to work. So we did a lot of workshops, went to universities, people invited us to do things, but we never had to charge. And we knew that we had a tourist visa in the US and in Canada, so we were not allowed to work. And of course, there were some exceptions that we could have worked a little bit at least, but we first was clear we don't want to. So we never charge. We're just here. We do whatever is fun for us to do, for them to do, whatever's useful to them. So we worked quite a lot, especially also with the podcast, but we never had to charge anything. And that was also kind of a dream life, because so many things emerged and happened, especially with people that we met, solution focused practitioners. We just spent time, and then mostly a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. One time we stayed for about 5 weeks with Heather Fisk or with Monica Rotner, for example. She said, "Oh, you're here now, so on Monday I have a team meeting. Do you want to come and do something?" Okay, let's go. So we did a solution focused team workshop there, and all those things. It was just so much easier not to charge anything and just to to go about our solution focused way of traveling.
Obviously, you answered one of the next questions. Actually, you answered several of the next questions, but I'm going to jump to the biggest one that hasn't really been addressed. Why solution-focused brief therapy?
Because it's ethical, because it's joy, because it's what we are passionate about. So the why is, but I think it's really, at the end of the day, it's the approach that makes the most sense in so many ways, and it brings lightness and it brings joy and it brings hope in difficult times. So it's not always light and joy and tra-la-la, but in moments which are really difficult, it gives hope. It gives it gives hope, but we have just the way we view the world helps to co-construct hope, to do hope together in a meaningful way, and to have possibilities arise together in the way how we have a conversation. And I think that's really the thing that made me more and more passionate about solution focus. And then there is also a part, I'm always really intrigued by things that are not mainstream in a way. So, and the paradigm shift that solution focus still is something that keeps fascinating me, and, discovering or seeing myself doing silly things from an old paradigm, and then noticing it and challenging myself to adapt it to a new paradigm is something that fills me personally with joy and passion.
Yeah, and I think there's also the story that we experienced when we came to the US that we didn't even know. But in the US, we only met people that talked about solution-focused brief therapy and the model. And they learned that from a small group of practitioners that all worked with Insu and Steve, Insu Kim Berg, Steve the Chaser, and it kind of grew from the inside out. And in Europe, we were socialized in a different way, because there is the EBTA, European Brief Therapy Association, but there's also the Soul World network, and Soul World is solution focused in organizations. And the European solution focused community, there are many more people who work in organizations who don't do therapy, who might do coaching. Some are leaders, some are just organizational developers, team developers, a lot of people just working in and with organizations with solution focus. So for us, solution focus was never a therapy approach. And it was always something that you could use in everyday life, in your leadership life, in your organizational life. And we realized when we came to the US and talked to almost all the people we met who were therapists, that there are many similarities, but also a different way of looking at what we're doing. For example, we met quite some people on our tour, but also before, who could never imagine that solution focus is something outside of the therapy room. It kind of belongs as a therapy approach, as a model, evidence-based treatment, things, kind of words like that. And for us, it was always like, it's just a conversational approach to use in everyday life. And of course, you can use it in therapy, but you can also use it in coaching, in, parenting, in schoolwork, in whatever. And what we realized is that even in the US and Canada, people are not only therapists, but also, let's say, school counselors, for example, or using that in other ways, but they still talk much more about solution-focused brief therapy and kind of look at it through the lens of therapy than people here in Europe from the Soul World community. And I always make the joke that if you talk to therapists that have, 8 conversations a day, 8 therapy conversations, you can talk about the details of the second word of the second question, and they're very fascinated about that. If you bring that topic to a Soul World conference, they'll say, I don't know. And if you ask the Soul World people about something, kind of how could I apply this element of solution focus in whatever, they come up with thousands of ideas. And if you bring that to therapists, well, we can use it in the therapy room, but I'm not sure where else. So kind of
how can we facilitate large-scale conversations in organizations and change, and I don't know, and there are amazing ideas and skills in facilitating change processes and facilitating towards something that people want, when we have the assumption that change is happening all the time anyway. But so I think that's also really exciting. I think one of the things that's so exciting for me, and I think for us, the variety, the breadth of how you can use this approach or make use of this approach. Because at the end of the day, as Dominik just highlighted for us, it's not a model, but it's a way of approaching the world. And we can have conversations till, I don't know, past midnight, just being very nerdy about a word that and the meaning of this word, and how we see it reflected in this tiny little moment of behavior. And it's just exciting because it's so rich.
That's great. And thank you for both of you for adding that, because most of the people I've talked to have been therapists. And the only, I don't know if you know Jason Pascoe in Australia. He's the only, he was trained by Mark McCurgo, who and so going into businesses and systems and whatnot. But most people only think of it exactly, because I'm American, I've been kind of indoctrinated from the therapy side of it, even though I was originally trained by people in England. So I'm trying to think of it as a more holistic thing. The funny thing is, last night, my daughter made a comment, and then I said something, and then my wife sarcastically said, "So what's your best hope behind that comment?"
Yeah.
And so yeah, but this leads to the next question.
So sorry, not so. So this is exactly what we call friend power, right? When you have other forces in the family that support you to reflect on your best hopes, and even when I don't know what you said, but in our household, it sometimes would happen that I'm a little bit upset or something, and then Dominik would ask me a similar question, and it would be like, oh, thank you. Yes, there is this way to see it, and there is another way to see it, as Insu, I think,
I
might
suspect
say.
you two are a lot more chill in your household with the three of you than we are with the four of us, because unfortunately my kids have my genes. And my wife and I have we have a lot of the same strengths, but we also have a lot of the same weaknesses. So when, fortunately, very rarely does more than one person spike at the same time. So usually the other three of us are able to talk somebody down, but when we have two or three of us spiking, it's just ugly. So, what are the three most important things you think people should master as they learn to use solution-focused thinking?
It's a very difficult question. I think it was yesterday, I read this quote on Facebook. I think that Arno Huibers and Terry Pichot shared of Steve the Chaser saying or not saying, we don't know, something along the lines of that there is no basic and advanced training in solution focused, but it's just more to get to know the basics even better. I would maybe translate. I'm not sure if it's something to master or learn. I think it's more a way of approaching everyday life. I think for us, what we are very passionate about is to have conversations. And sometimes we can record them, then of course we can go back and look at them and see them. And sometimes we just experience them and then reflect on them. And people often asked us on our journey, how can you stay solution focused all the time? And we said, well, we can't. If we assume the change is happening all the time, then sometimes we are doing it kind of better. We manage to do it better, and sometimes we don't. And but if we look at what we did and look at what has worked, and look at what we would like to do next time, and learn in a solution-focused way about what we're doing, then we're hopeful to maybe do it even a little bit better next time. And kind of this learning journey, I think that's what fascinates us much more than kind of doing it right or perfect or I don't know, for years it was how do we ask the American question in the perfect way? And then for us, it's just so much just interaction, and you experience that interaction in real life, and we can learn from that and master to learn from that. I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. Elfie?
Yeah, I'm still thinking. There are so many answers, and maybe different, and different for every person on the planet as well. I think for me, one of the things that still is really helpful in learning solution focus again and again is to stay curious, and to stay curious about what's working, to stay curious about the world somehow, and to stay particularly curious. Is what I think I do what I want I do, what I really do? And I think these three things, to see there is something I want to do, there is something I think I do, and there is something I do and to stay curious about these three things and align it more and more, be it on a tools level, be it on a thinking level, with bringing that closer together somehow. This is something that's very useful for me, and obviously for a lot of other people it might play out very differently. And yeah, in my story, I think it's not this one thing, and I think it's really hard to put something very complex. And Dominik would say that very often. We are in a conversation, and then at the end of the conversation, we want to make a conclusion and write down the three essential, most important points we discussed. But there is so much more. There are so many nuances, and in the way how we had our conversation, things changed. We transformed. We are not the same persons than we are before we started the conversation. We co-constructed meaning together. We have a shared understanding of a few more things than we had before, and that changes, right? And this is something I'm really excited about, and I think it's really hard to say that's the three things, because I think it's the process. Maybe it's this process of having these, of learning, of reading, of listening to a podcast, of engaging with people, of going to a training, of staying engaged, of being curious about the paradigm shift, of what does it mean change is happening all the time, and what we need to do as solution-focused practitioners is to amplify useful change and notice that and support people to notice that. Or seeing the other person as an expert in their lives. What does that really mean? And now I'm quoting our dear friend Heather Fisk, whose grandmother would say, how does that look like when it comes to visit on a Saturday afternoon? Not the big word, but how does it look like? And to stay curious about that, maybe.
I think it connects to the way we like to look at conversations at the moment, is really to have this conversation on video. Because for years we talked about conversations we had or other people had out of memory. And with microanalysis of face-to-face dialogue, we want to have videos of our conversations and then look at the videos. And there you see what you really did, not what you think you did. And we just had this conversation today. We are very fortunate that we can look at many tapes, especially in our mentor coachings, where people come to us and we look at the coaching conversation they had, and then we talk about that. And we're just writing, or Elfie was writing a feedback to a little sequence today where coachee said something, and the coach kind of realized, well, I want to step in here, and challenged what the client said. And it was perfectly clear that most people would have challenged what the client said here. And we talked about these 2 seconds or 3 seconds maybe that we had on tape today for about 1.5 hours, and talked about options. What options could she have had there? Because this was just one version that she did, and it turned out this way. And what could she have done differently? And instead of knowing what we could do, we like to explore. And we said, well, what do you think would happen if she would have asked about the preferred future of this version, and then have this really vast picture of the preferred future? Might she still have had the urge to step in or not? Or what different options could she have given? And if she gives options or steps in, is she really seeing the client as expert or not? So today, by discussing that, we developed a new understanding of how to deal in situations like that, but also of our current misunderstanding of solution focus. So really having our conversations of others, talking about those elements and learning together with or from them is just, I think, our biggest fascination at the moment. Instead of knowing how it is correct or not correct. So.
There's a brilliant article from Lance Taylor and Joel Simon on opportunities in solution-focused dialogue. So that might be interesting for people who enjoy looking at opportunities, and they, in their article, role model in a very beautiful way how you can look for opportunities. So they did it together, and they also show how you could use that in a training, for instance.
And who wrote that?
Joel Simon and Lance Taylor. We can share it with you in the
Please.
chat.
Lance Taylor. Okay. I've only been doing this for 6 years, so I've come across an interesting journey, and I like learning from other people. Like the whole microanalysis and everything with it, I've only been exposed to in the past 6 months, and like really, and going back with the videos, like I'm launching my own training company, and I was putting together exemplars, and I was Zooming them with different people, and what I thought I was doing in the preferred future, I didn't like what I was actually doing. I didn't realize it until I had actually videoed it and watched it back. And I know that was the premise what Steve and Sue used to do back in the day. And but generally, I don't get many opportunities to do it. So when I was making my own exemplars, I realized that I was like, I was speaking to what would rather than what is happening. Like in that preferred future. So like it's just a semantical thing, but in English it's a big difference. One is future projection. One is actually imagining you're doing it. And I didn't realize that I had created that bad habit over the past several years. And I don't even know when it came in because I haven't been having the opportunity to video. So how often do you get, I'm going totally off script. How often do you watch yourselves practice?
Oh, I was just about to share this story. The other week, we were sitting on the dinner table and having a conversation. And I was talking to our daughter, and all of a sudden, Dominik pulled out his mobile phone and just videotaped the two of us. And I put that into Elan and analyzed it. So we can be really nerdy about that. And I think we can do it. You could do it much more often. So at the moment, this was a really fun moment anyway. But we would, whenever it's possible, try to record. And but then you have the recording, and then you still need the time, to watch it again and to look at it. So what we love to do is to create little projects around what we do where we see, okay, we could maybe analyze that and write an article about that. And then it's much more likely to put it in and to learn from that. And or sometimes we would just sit down and listen to part of the conversation or to moments of a conversation. And how often is really, it's quite difficult. There are times where we have more tapes, and sometimes there are moments where we just create one sitting the two of us together or on Zoom maybe and record us. So and then to look at it and maybe you have a more.
I think
a little bit.
Much more often. It's probably every other day. At the moment, we look at tapes from others. So that's much more often because that's the way we also earn our money. And I think it's what I realize with watching myself is that I get curious about certain aspects of conversations, and these change over time, of course. Maybe the what you just mentioned with what you saw on the video might be a question for me or for us. We usually have the same questions that kind of build up, and we talk about that every day, kind of 24/7. So we have the same topics. But this might be a kind of a focus of observation in our next 2 weeks in our coaching conversations. How do we talk about the preferred future? What tense do we use, for example, and what difference does that make? What answers do we get? Because we are much more, through looking at our videos or other videos of others, much more interested in not the correct way to do it, but the possibilities. We see there is we could talk about preferred future in this kind of this I think it's in German, it's conditional way of how would it be or how will it be. Then, but there's no study that says something is better or not. So just the choice we have. But then we look at what happens. How do people that respond talk on, and how do we then talk on? Maybe sometimes it switches. We start with, I would how would you notice? Oh, I would notice that I do this and this and this, because then I will be this and this and this, and I will do this and this and this. And then what do we take from that? Do we go on with the will or the would? So that's the interesting thing for us to see, the kind of the journey of the co-construction in our dialogues at the moment. And then we have an answer at the moment where we know, okay, for us it's now at this moment in time, this is the best version. It changes over the years. And so we go on to another topic, maybe. How can we have, with ICF, the International Coaching Federation, for example, they have the idea of a coaching agreement. And how can you have a good coaching or therapy agreement in the beginning of a conversation? And if you don't do that, what happens? And in solution focus, we don't have that. If you look at kind of a classic solution focused conversation, and still we have good conversations. And so what might be the difference there if you do more of that, the solution focused conversation, or less of that? And so to explore that or specific topics is, I think, our fascination. And then to look at our video, how we do it, then that's interesting. But just to look at the video per se, I think that's not that interesting for us anymore at the moment, at least.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
May I? Yeah, thank you. No, just so one thing that we are really, 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 and I think maybe I even more than you, Dominik, are interested and passionate about is listening. Mm-hmm. And so we have. I love to go back to older tapes of myself. So I think we have one tape that we sometimes would use in trainings where I'm always like, oh my gosh. And I love it because I just see what's different. And I think that's like maybe it's around 6-7 years old. And, and when I look at my listening and what I know now from research that Janet Babelas and many other people also did, we know that listening is not something passive we do. So with our listener responses, just as you're nodding right now, yeah, with our listener responses, we in a face-to-face dialogue, that is not scripted, we highly influence the way the conversation goes. And when I look at tapes, and particularly when I look, you can even see it when you listen to a tape, but even more when you look at a tape and have audible and visible displays of listening, for instance, you can see what the person is listening for. Because if someone tries to understand what the problem is, they would nod at different times. They would give facial expression at different times and in different ways than if you would listen for what's important for this person. Or if you listen for what the person wants, and if you want to find out what the person really wants and the resources they have, and you hear a different story, and you co-construct just with your responses a different story. And I think this is really exciting. And looking back at this tape, I can see how I'm really interested. I mean, I wasn't really in the way I remember this conversation. I was not interested in the problem. But when I see my nods and when I see my facial expressions, then I see, oh, I wouldn't listen this way anymore. And for me, one of the most exciting things is to look back at old tapes after a few years and see, now I'm not doing this anymore. So yeah, we cannot encourage people enough to tape themselves and to just go back to that after years, and it's just exciting.
If you do trainings, that's what we realized. If you do trainings just to show your tapes or your parts of a conversation that are not perfect, because we know trainers that just show the perfect parts, and we just showed the parts that are just kind of where something interesting is happening, and then we can talk about that. And then mostly, let's say that the tape that Elfie just mentioned, we could change that, could take another tape that's much better. But it's not about being good or doing it in a good way, but about looking at it and kind of learning from that. And I think that's also for us goes back to the way into Steve and their team looked at conversations back then. Because back then, Scott Miller talked about that on our podcast. He said, well, back then, solution focus was a verb. It was just what we did. And it wasn't kind of set in stone how it is and what is good. And then, of course, people started to write about it, and there they developed kind of the all those elements of solution-focused brief therapy or solution-focused practices, and it suddenly became something that is more or less set in stone. If you do solution-focused brief therapy, you have to do it like this or like this. Mm-hmm. So whenever someone says, this is the correct way of doing it, we're like, let's have a look at that. Let's see what happens if you do it this way. And let's see what happens when you do it this way. And for example, we had the just a quick story about the best hopes question. Brief's best hopes question in German doesn't translate. I think it doesn't translate in English well too. But in German, it's kind of an odd question. And we asked this question, and we just didn't get the responses. So, what are your best hopes from coming here? And they talked about their expectations for the conversation. So we knew this question doesn't work, kind of in our conversation. So we had this kind of research project that Elfie and I, and then also others did, where we looked at and we had in every 5 conversations, we changed the first question. So we modified this question until we got the answers that we wanted. Or best hopes question, brief's best hopes question wants the preferred future after the session. So if you ask the best hopes question and you get the, expectation of the session, that is not the intent of the question. So we changed that also with Kirsten Dirov and others.
How did you
until we had. We in German is what works really well is was erhoffst du dir aus unserem Gespräch? So what are you hoping for from our conversation? Works much better. In German, we get, I think, about 90% of the answers at least start in this answering spectrum of what we want here. So this exploration is, I think, that's what interests us.
Yeah, I'm so much more fascinated about this. I could talk about this exact thing for the next 2 hours, and I won't. But
we should meet again.
Well, I really want to share I want to share my training protocol with you and get your feedback from it, but not right now. But I became fascinated because I got trained at Brief, and then I had to change how it was done to fit into a school context. Because, but then I was also, so I kept trying to figure out, I did some trainings with Elliot Connie, I did some trainings with Linda Metcalf, and then I came across Debbie Hogan, and I was doing a lot of reading about Steve and Insoo and read their books, and I was reading all these different overlapping principles that do it differently. And so then I tried to synthesize, and I think I succeeded, something that sticks to the major principles, but also can be done in 15 to 30 minutes instead of 45 to 60. And but I realize if I talk to any purist on any one of the branches of the tree, they would say I'm doing it wrong. But if I talk to somebody, so I'd really like to hear your take at some point. But I love how for me, it's the 3 major things. It's getting out of my own way. It's self-check. and then it's solution-focused listening and solution-focused looking. And listening is based upon the not knowing stance, so you can co-construct, and solution-focused listening is based upon reframing. And and if you can do that, it doesn't matter which structure you follow. You can do any structure as long as you can do those three things. Because the people who become solution forced are the ones who ram their approach through on anybody, because they're listening and looking what the person really wants or needs in front of them. But I don't know. Now I'm just hypothesizing. But Adam Frohr does a whole bunch of research, and I was asking him when I was interviewing him, because I had already started to realize that there were major differences in the solution-focused family tree. And I asked him, so when you're doing your research, how can you necessarily validate what is best practice for solution focus when you have different practitioners doing it differently? And he said, well, and he gave me a very tactful answer on how they try to follow a certain protocol and whatnot. But then still, I am really wondering because it seems like the tree is getting farther apart from each other, not more unified. So eventually, how can any of the research really validate the overall practice when when things are falling farther and farther away based upon cultural and philosophical differences? So, okay, now usually I cut myself speaking out.
Conversation partner for you, Joe.
Yeah,
so.
So what do you think about all that?
Pardon?
What do you think about all that? Like when you normally I cut myself out of all of this, and I'm not going to be editing this one. So this is going to be really. I feel I'm not going to watch this one again because.
But that's great. We should ask you the questions. It would be much more interesting.
What do you think of people who are zealots for any one approach within solution focus?
Yeah.
So, actually, I give one possible answer that just comes to mind. When we started our journey to North America and our journey in the motorhome, which started basically in Europe, we noticed there are so many brilliant practitioners out there doing really great work and doing it from a solution focus in a puristic, even solution focused way. And that was actually part of how our podcast started, because we said there is no one who makes this variety of how you can apply solution focus in so many different ways, approachable in till you go and listen to a podcast. That's an easy thing. So that's So, and we said, okay, let's just whenever we meet someone, let's have a conversation. And let's talk about it, and let's talk about what people fascinates about solution focus and how they apply it. And we met so many different people who apply solution focus, even from a very puristic understanding, in a very beautiful way. And I mean, you just are trained by two of our heroes. I don't like this hero talk, but I really appreciate, and we really appreciate the amazing work that Breathe is doing, and they influenced our way of thinking and practicing a lot. And we are big fans of the work Debbie and Dave Hogan are doing. And just being in their presence is somehow changing something. So, and they do things differently.
Yeah.
And yet you can't say they do it more or less solution focused, but they do it with a different flavor.
Yeah.
And or like Svea van der Horn, I love her dearly, and she is always like she uses to say, she's a South African practitioner, and she said, you have to find your own sparkle in that, and we always want to support people to apply the solution focused approach in a way that their sparkles, their brilliance becomes visible in how they co-construct the conversation with their clients. And I think this is what I really love about it. And there's one thing that that I notice that makes a difference for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if someone is talking about solution focus, and even if they mix it up with different things, but they know, okay, this is the solution focus part in it, and this is a different part in it. And if they make deliberate choices, I think this is a very valuable thing. And particularly as a coach or as a trainer, when you can make that visible and when you're clear about your intentions or deliberate about, why you would do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And because then you can enter conversation and then it's fun.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, I think the miracle question, blah, 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 blah. And I think the tomorrow question, blah, 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 blah. And yet both are very solution-focused way of inviting a client to think about their preferred future. And so I think that's for me also the sign if someone is doing it from a solution-focused mindset. But then there are so many different ways in how you can have a conversation with a client, and then. And now I'm only talking about the practitioners, right? But we have clients, and every client is unique. So, let's work with that. Let's really work with our clients and then check our presuppositions and our assumptions we use when we have a conversation. And am I careful there? Am I careful that I invite a strengthening dialogue? So am I careful that I have presuppositions or concepts in my questions that nourish hope, that nourish possibilities rather than other things? So, yeah, you keep me going.
No, it's also a question that we could talk about for hours, because I knew, when I started doing solution focus, back then coaching, I didn't know what I was doing and I just did it. And then at one moment in time, I exactly knew how it is working and how it has to be. And all the other people who didn't do it the correct way, because I learned from, of course, the best teachers, and they know that, and I know that now too, and they did wrong. And then they, especially in the soul world communities, you have so many different ways of doing it, and people mix approaches. And I, at one time, was really, really angry, and said, "How could that be?" And I talked to Jenny Clark over lunch, and she said, "Dominik, there are gatekeepers who kind of want to make sure that solution focus stays solution focus, and that's very important, because if everything is solution focused, the approach kind of dissolves. We don't have an approach anymore. So it's very important that you have the people who exactly know how it's working. And of course, everybody knows something else and describes it in a different way. But this is important that people write books about it, how it's really working, and this is the correct way to do it this way. And then you need the other kind of the door openers, you said, that open the door for change, for all those discussions about the development of the approach. And these are also very valuable that you have them in the conversation. And so kind of sometimes it closes down and solution focus is exactly this, and then sometimes it opens up again, it's everything, and then it closes down again a different way, and it opens up again. And that was really helpful for me, because I realized, there are different ways, and you need people who combine, you need people who do it in exactly their way. And also on our journey, we realized that everybody is attracting different people. If someone says, solution focus is a scientific approach, this person kind of invites other people to the table and to solution focus than someone who sees it as a spiritual approach or a therapy approach or a systemic approach or whatever. So they all attract different people. But then what happens is exactly what you described. People get into solution focused world through one kind of training institute, through one version. And that's the correct version for them. But then they start to travel. They go to conferences, they get to know other people, they go to different workshops, and they say, this is interesting. I go to therapy show, I learn, let's say, a traditional version of that, and then say, there's a brief version of that, and then you go to Elliot Connie, and then you go to whoever. You go, maybe you are in the coaching world, and you want to have accreditation, you encounter ICF with the Coaching Federation core competencies, and you wrestle with them, and then it's changed again. So I would kind of challenge the assumption that I think it was always the variety was always there, and also the strict way of how it has to be was always there.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I think it's but it's just at the moment, and I was like that too, and it will be like that maybe in a few years again. But at the moment, I think it's very arrogant to tell others that they're doing something wrong. Because you would not do that in a therapy or coaching conversation. You would see the other as experts for his or her life. And the other person found out a way or a variety of ways how this approach works with their life and their situation they're in, and they develop the best method at the moment how to apply that.
That will change as well.
That will change it, yeah. And who am I to challenge that and to tell that person you did wrong? If you do that, in my view, at the moment, you are not living up to the solution-focused principles. Because then if I can do that with my trainees, then I can also do that with my coaches and tell them that they're doing it wrong in their life. But if I really adopt a stance of the other is the expert for his or her life, I need to listen. And then we can discuss discuss options. And you can show your training design, we can show our training design, and we can see and then learn from each other. But
yes.
Yours is not. It's just different. And it's yours and your life, and ours are in our life. But anyone who comes and kind of belittles, or also sometimes they treat the other person like an infant and tell them that they're doing it wrong. At the moment I cannot stand that.
Well, it's one of the questions that I'm not going to ask you because I already know a lot about your life and you explained it, was do you use solution-focused thinking in your own life? And one of the things I admire the most about you two is that you do. And like when I was talking to Evan George, I asked him that, and he was just like, not as much, just to paraphrase because it's not exactly what he said, but he said, although I like to think I do, it's really tough to use it, especially in like parenting. And I was doing some parenting courses in solution-focused practice at the time at my school. And he said the problem is, as a parent, it's hard to take the not knowing stance because you know that it's best for them to do their homework. And I love the fact that you guys walk the walk, that you actually do put it into your life and you live it, because I have a hard time being an emotional fly on the wall and using it in my life, and that's what I strive to do. So what you have done for the past several years that you explained is what I want to be able to share with the world rather than my practice. I want to be able to walk the walk, and that's what I struggle with.
We share like for sure exciting stories, and yes, it's parenting is hard and it's up and downs, and together with my dear friend Tara Gretton from the UK, who's also a school counselor, by the way, or working with schools a lot.
I don't know her well, but I've met her.
We were having a lot of conversations about how to apply solution-focused approach in everyday family life. And we designed a program which is called the Blossoming Family, where we basically collected stories from people who know the solution focus and who also have stories to share of how they applied it in their family life. And we invited them to share stories about where solution focus made a difference in a moment in their family life when it comes to nourish hope, to nourish love, to nourish possibilities, connection, beliefs. So the belief in each other, also interactions. And I think that's really powerful to have these stories and to share these stories, because with that we can inspire each other. And I'm a firm believer in stories and in stories we share where just what you shared earlier, the story with your wife asking about what are your best hopes from this. This will be with me for the next days for sure, and it will make me smile, and it will make me act differently because it's really inspiring. And I love to collect stories and to then keep sharing them, because I believe that stories at the end of the day change the world. And we have really great stories that we... so looking with a solution focus, in a solution-focused way at the world, creates beautiful stories in itself. Yeah. And hopeful stories that invite you to see something different. And this is what I would like to share. That's and excellent. I would like to share my own stories, so I have to hold myself accountable to create these stories. And sometimes it's exactly this thought that helps me to stop being annoyed or to, I want to scream now, but I don't do it because I really want to walk the talk. So, okay, what is important here? What's important for me? What's important for you? Let's take a breath and then, go about it again.
On that note, I'm going to stop the recording. However, Jackie von Zifferberg was telling me that when she started her business 10 years ago, it took her a good week before she realized that she was wallowing in the problem before she decided to basically walk the walk and SF the situation to put things together, and it worked. But let me stop this because no one's going to watch for an hour and a half.
Never know.